today's talk title is All In, which is what inspired our song, that there's a time for everything. There's a time for talking, and there's a time for praying, and there's a time for doing. And as you all know, this was the week of doing as far as moving was concerned for my family. Quite an adventure that has been. A good adventure, actually. Hiring movers is probably the best thing ever. Yeah. But you know, the process of buying a house and moving didn't start with packing, the doing. It started with the thinking and talking. It started with praying about, you know, is this the right thing to do? Is this the right place to go? Where do we want to be in town? Do we want to buy a house in Alaska? I mean, all of those things were part of the question of this, part of the discerning process that happened as part of the talking process, which happened long before the doing process of piles of paperwork and then actually physically moving ourselves from one place to another. And it's interesting, I feel like we're in a time of doing as a culture and society right now as well. There's been a lot of talking and maybe not as much praying as there could be, but we could always use more prayer. But we're in a time where people are standing up and saying, this is important to me and we need to do something better, which is very exciting. So we're in a very important part of doing. But this cycle doesn't like end on doing, like it's a continual process, right? Because every good thing worth doing, I believe, comes from the deep. You can do a better job when it's spiritually grounded, when it's grounded in the truth of who you are and what is yours to do. And you don't do that by just running off the rail. You have to do that by staying connected and doing the prayer. So it always comes back to that. So, you know, when you're like sitting there on Saturday, maybe you don't know, when you're sitting there on Saturday afternoon and you're like, man, I guess I got to figure out what I'm going to say tomorrow. And you're kind of like, this is what I do. I'm like scrolling through Facebook because I don't know what I'm going to do. The people post quotes and they're perfect and it's so great. I love it. This has totally happened. So Herbert Hoover said, wisdom consists not so much in knowing what to do in the ultimate as knowing what to do next. I was like, yes, because I think that sometimes when it comes to going and doing all the things that we want to do, we can sometimes get caught up in the bigness of the dream or the bigness of the goal. I want, you know, if you say, I'm going to redo all the landscaping in the backyard. I'm not talking about my house because my house is not trees, which is awesome. So nature's in charge of that. But we're going to do the whole thing. You might just get paralyzed by the bigness of the whole thing. But if you say, well, let's just start with a sort of a sketchy overall plan, and then we'll put in the first thing, and then we'll put in the next thing. So we just need to know what's next. Unless you're going to pay someone to do the whole thing, and then you can do the whole thing, I suppose. But, you know, if it's a project you're going to work on, and that's one of the things I liked. It's important to know that there is no, we can think we're done, but we're never really done, right? Even a building, we have an architectural plan. The building is created, but it's not done. It still has to be maintained and cleaned and brought up to code and all of these things, right? There's no destination. Our spiritual journey has no destination, and pretty much none of our life. We never get to the final part. So if we can let go of needing to know that we've arrived at that place, then we can just be in the journey, and it's much easier. So the most important thing to know is what to do next. And I would say to do it with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, right? Because when we really go in, when we go all in, we're so much more powerful than when we sort of do the, well, I think that's kind of maybe, sorta, you know. I mean, if you're gonna tear up the yard, you should tear up the yard, not just sort of like play around with it, right? And so part of this whole idea of that we have a time of thinking and a time of talking and a time of praying and a time of doing reminded me of the serenity prayer, which you probably all know. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So there's a huge part of that that's about discernment, right? About knowing what's mine to do and then doing it all in and knowing what's not mine to do. Now, when it says the accept the things I can't change, there's an important question in there. What can you really not change it? Is it important to you enough do you think that it needs to be changed? It's a question, not an answer. Maybe the answer is no, there is nothing I can do about this. Like the past, right? Can't change the past. You only change how you feel about it. But some things, even though they look like they're institutions or things that can't be changed, maybe they can. It's a question. It's an important part of discernment. So I was looking up Reinhold Niebuhr, who's the one who wrote the Serenity Prayer. I was looking him up, and I'm sure that I learned this in seminary, but I forgot because I forgot most of that stuff. He was a big activist of his time. He was challenging conservative people to not be so rigid in their understanding of scripture and things like that. And he was challenging progressive people to be more engaged in the process of change, not just to put a prayer stamp on things, which sometimes we do. Well, we'll just pray about it and that'll make it better. We actually have to go out and do things sometimes. We need to feed the people who are hungry until they've figured out, until they get to a place where they can feed themselves. We need to feed them. And that's why Unity's fifth principle is knowing the truth isn't enough. We have to do it. Do something about it. Right? And so we have to do the moving your feet part. So that's the feeding the people that need to be fed, whether that's actual people who are hungry or whether that's some other need that needs to be met, whether it's a need of safety, whether it's a need of understanding, whether it needs shelter. I mean, it can be really basic stuff like that, but there's a lot of other things, you know. We've had our own, a lot of social movement stuff here in our community in this last year. That was a big deal for me to go to. Part of my thinking and praying and talking and then action process, you know, when I wrote I co-wrote the op-ed about Proposition 1, which was trying to limit the access that our transgender neighbors had to society here in Anchorage. I said, no, we everybody belongs in the circle. And so, but it was a big deal for me to go from knowing that truth and feeling that very hard, you know, solidly knowing that everyone belongs at the table, to taking the next step where putting my name on the thing that was in the paper and putting our church's name on the thing that was in the paper. That was a big action step for me because I hadn't put myself out there like that before. And Unity has been back and forth with the current culture is moving back into more of being a voice for these things. When I was a kid and growing up in Unity, we were very much the pray it and it'll fix it kind of attitude, which I just don't think that's where we're at as a society right now. We have to move our feet. So it felt like the right thing to do, and so I did it. And it was a big deal, and you know, so sometimes the right thing to do is scary. Often the right thing to do is scary. So what does action look like? So I was Fox wrote, and he wrote this little pamphlet called The Mental Equivalent. They wrote so many tracts and pamphlets back in the old days. Oh my goodness, so many of them. And in his pamphlet, he said, what is true action? A true action is one that really changes things, that gets you somewhere. A false action does not. A true action is one that really changes things. So we're talking, it could be changing things like in our physical environment. It could be changing things in the societal world. It could be changing things in our consciousness, right? Like trying to sing a song to a different melody than you're used to. Woo! Right? It's good to do things that challenge the way we assume things are. And then he continues, true activity is always within outward. False activity tries to work from without inward. Right? Prayer is always an inside job. We can pray with each other and support each other, but the point of changing ourselves is you're looking at it in the mirror. Nobody else can change you. We can hold the high watch, but we can't change it. So, anyway, back to Emmett. I just have to have commentary on everything. So, true activity is always from within outward. False activity tries to work from without inward. If you're working from within out, your work is alive and will be productive. If you are working from outside inward, your work is dead and will have a bad effect on you. Now, I see some of you nodding, which means that you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you are moving from the truth of your being, you are moving from that place of groundedness, of prayer, of connecting to your spiritual truth, being in community. You've maybe talked to your people who are close to you, and you've come to a consensus of what yours to do. There's nothing that can stop you. There may be hiccups along the way, but you see them as speed bumps, not as walls. When you're moving from within out, from the spirit of truth within you out. And now other people may see those same things as walls, because they're moving from maybe an outward obligation of something, of what they're supposed to do. And so they don't have that inward fire to keep them going. When we don't have that inward fire to keep us going, we get burnt out. Or worse, we really, we crash and burn. I've seen it happen, and it's not a pretty thing. So another great thing I saw on Facebook, a reminder that, when I was in choir, and if you've done any kind of group musical experience that requires the breath, you might know that if you're holding a long note, longer than anybody can hold the breath, you stagger breathe, right? And so that means maybe I'll breathe sort of near the beginning, and then I'll keep going, and then you can breathe later, and between all of us, we'll make it sound like an uninterrupted sound. And so when we are with our community, when we are working together towards something, we're spirit-centered, we'll know when it's our turn to take a breath. Because sometimes we do have to take a breath, right? Take a vacation. Stay home, get a massage, whatever it is that we do, right? We take a breath. But we do those things not because we're on the verge of burnout. Hopefully, we take the breath when it's our turn to take a breath, right? So we don't get to the end of the song, the note we're holding on, go, ugh, right? So it's not very pretty. So when we do those things, right? So that's part of that staying centered in prayer part, because if we can stay centered in our truth of our being, then we know. And then we remember. There is always going to be more emails in your email box. I know someone who said, my goal is just to not have any emails in my inbox. And I said, well, that's nice, but there's going to be emails in your inbox when you die, right? That maybe sounds a little morbid, but get over it. There's always going to be more. There's always going to be more. And it's okay. So like, let's just be present here and now instead of letting that external thing control our experience. You decide when it's time to take a pause, right? So that we can really truly engage in our lives. So, I want us to be able to show up more fully, always present in our lives all the time. And to go all into our lives, whatever is ours to do, we have to take the time for talking and connecting, read feedback, continuing to move. We have to take the time for spiritual practice, for prayer. And then we can act. Acting matters. Showing up matters. Your choices of consciousness matter. Because how we show up is as important as showing up. Right? So that is how we go all in.